This story begins with 9 very experienced hikers, young and adventurous, setting off into the Ural Mountains of Russia in 1959. Originally there were 10, but one turned back due to knee and joint pain. Most of them were students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov. Their goal? To reach Otorten, a mountain whose name ominously translates to "Don't go there" in the indigenous Mansi language. They never made it. Days after they were expected to return, search teams were sent into the snow-covered wilderness. What they found would become one of the most disturbing and unexplainable mysteries of the 20th century. When searchers finally located the hikers' campsite on February 26, their tent was found slashed open from the inside. The footprints in the snow led away in different directions, barefoot and half-dressed, as if they had fled in terror. The first bodies, those of Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Kurvanashenko, were found under a cedar tree, stripped down to their underclothing, their skin tinted an unnatural orange. It looked as if they had desperately tried to start a fire, their hands blackened from what seemed like severe burns. Their bodies also had unusual wounds. One had bitten off a portion of his own knuckle, possibly due to intense pain or fear. Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin were found frozen, positioned in ways that suggested they had tried to return to the tent. Rustam had a fractured skull, Zinaida had deep bruises consistent with a struggle, and Igor was found clutching a branch as if he had fought against something unseen. 2 months later, the remaining 4 hikers were found in a ravine, buried beneath the snow. Lyudmila was missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her face. Semyon suffered crushed ribs with a force likened to a car crash, yet no external wounds, no bruises, no cuts, no indication of an impact. What could have driven 9 seasoned hikers to flee their tent into the lethal cold? Avalanche? A common theory, but flawed. The tent wasn't buried, and their footprints leaving the tent were not covered by snow. If an avalanche had occurred, the bodies would have been buried deep under the snow, but this was not the case. Katabatic wind? A rare but deadly phenomenon where wind suddenly becomes strong enough to knock people off their feet and cause frostbite in minutes. But this doesn't explain the internal injuries or why some bodies were found with traces of radiation. Military involvement? Some believe the hikers stumbled upon a Soviet weapons test. Strange orbs were reported in the sky by nearby villagers, and radioactive traces were found on some clothing, but no official records confirm any testing in the area. Paranormal forces? The local Mansi people speak of spirits that haunt the mountains. Some say the hikers encountered something they weren't meant to see. Others speculate a Yeti-like creature could have been responsible, pointing to an eerie photograph found on one of the hikers' cameras that showed an ominous, shadowy figure. Infrasound and psychological breakdown? A scientific theory suggests that strong winds passing through the mountain could have created infrasound waves, low-frequency sounds that induce panic, hallucinations, and confusion. This could have led the hikers to believe they were in danger, causing them to flee irrationally. However, it does not account for the injuries sustained. The final reports listed the cause of death as an unknown compelling force. This case was closed without answers. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains an unsolved enigma. Over 60 years later, theories continue to emerge, but no single explanation fits all the evidence. Something drove those hikers into the cold that night, something so terrifying they never turned back. Even today, visitors to Dyatlov Pass report an eerie silence. No wildlife, no wind, just the weight of a tragedy frozen in time. Many modern expeditions have retraced the hikers' route, some equipped with the latest technology. Yet, Even in an era of advanced forensics, no one has been able to provide a definitive answer to what happened that night. In 2020, a new study suggested that a small, delayed avalanche may have played a role, but it still fails to explain the catastrophic injuries suffered by some of the hikers. To this day, the case continues to inspire books, films, and documentaries, each trying to decipher the chilling events on that fateful night. The question remains, what happened on that mountainside, and more importantly, could it happen again? It was December 1900 when the remote Flannan Isles Lighthouse, standing alone against the fury of the North Atlantic, became the setting for one of the most perplexing maritime mysteries in history. The lighthouse, perched on Elen Moor, one of Scotland's 7 hunter islands, was meant to be a beacon of safety for passing ships. Instead, it became a place of foreboding, a silent monolith guarding a story no one could explain. At the turn of the 20th century, lighthouse keeping was a profession of discipline and solitude. Keepers lived in near total isolation for weeks or months at a time, with only their fellow watchmen and the elements for company. Their duties were exhausting and relentless, maintaining the light, recording weather conditions, ensuring all equipment was functional, and keeping detailed logs of every event. In such a harsh environment, men relied on routine and each other to stay sane. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse was among the most isolated in Scotland. Located on a rocky, uninhabited island, in 1900 it had no direct means of communication with the mainland. Supplies were brought by boat at regular intervals, but storms often delayed these shipments, sometimes for weeks. The keepers who took this post had to be experienced, resilient, and mentally strong, but even the toughest men could succumb to the unforgiving isolation of the sea. On December 15th, the steamer Arctur, navigating treacherous waters near the Flannan Isles, noted something troubling. The lighthouse was dark. For such an essential beacon to fail was almost unheard of. Concerned, but unable to investigate, the crew reported it upon arrival at port. The Northern Lighthouse Board acted swiftly, dispatching a relief vessel, the Hesperus, to investigate. What they found when they arrived on December 26 would haunt the records of maritime history forever. As the crew approached the lighthouse, they saw no welcome, no movement, just an eerie silence. The keepers, James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, were nowhere to be found. The lighthouse's door was unlocked, the clock had stopped, and half-eaten meals sat untouched on the table. It was as if time had simply frozen in place. Of the 3 men, James Ducat was the principal keeper, a veteran of the trade with over 20 years of experience. He was known for being responsible and composed, a man who had faced the worst the sea could throw at him. Thomas Marshall, the second assistant, was younger but highly capable. He worked as a lighthouse keeper before and was no stranger to isolation. Donald MacArthur was an occasional keeper that was filling in for a sick colleague. He was an experienced sailor. He was a family man, but known for his fiery temper. Some reports suggest he was prone to violent outbursts, making him a poor choice for such a confined environment. Upon further inspection, the lighthouse's logbook was discovered, and its final entries would only deepen the mystery. December 12th, Keeper Thomas Marshall wrote of severe winds, stronger than anything he had ever seen. Strangely, no recorded storms had been reported in the area at the time. December 13th, the log described how Ducat had been unusually quiet, and MacArthur, a seasoned sailor known for his toughness, had been crying. A storm was supposedly raging outside, but no ships in the area reported anything unusual, much less a storm. December 14th, the final entry contained only 3 chilling lines. Storm ended. Sea calm. God is over all. The 3 men were never seen again. The official explanation pointed to a rogue wave or a powerful storm sweeping the men into the sea. This might explain their absence, but not the strange log entries, nor did it explain why all three men would have gone out in such a storm, abandoning their posts. The lighthouse was never to be left unmanned. Did isolation drive one of the keepers mad? A violent struggle could have led to their demise, but no blood, weapons, or signs of a fight were found. Their disappearance was eerily clean. More than a century later, the disappearance of the Flannan Isles keepers remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. The lighthouse still stands, now automated. No more keepers, no more watchful eyes. To this day, passing ships report an uneasy feeling near the island. Some claim to hear distant voices carried by the wind calling for help. Others speak of strange lights flickering from the lighthouse, even though there are no longer people working the lighthouse. The sea keeps its secrets well, and the Flannan Isles remain as they always have, a place where men disappear and legends are born. In the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, in the quiet town of Lewisburg, West Virginia, a ghostly tale unfolded that would become one of the most chilling and unique murder cases in American history. It was the year 1897, and what should have been a tragic but straightforward death soon turned into a supernatural mystery that would leave a lasting mark on the legal system. On a cold winter's morning, January 23, 1897, a local boy was sent on an errand to the home of Zona Heister Shue, a young woman who had recently married a man named Erasmus Trout Shue. When the boy arrived, he found Zona's lifeless body at the foot of the stairs, her head slightly tilted, her eyes open and frozen in a final, unseeing gaze. The boy ran to alert his mother, who then called for the local doctor and coroner, George Knapp. By the time Dr. Knapp arrived, Trout Shue had already carried his wife's body upstairs, dressed her in a high-necked gown with a stiff collar, and placed a veil over her face. His behavior was erratic and distraught, refusing to leave her side while wailing with exaggerated grief. Dr. Knapp made a brief examination, but, perhaps intimidated by Trout's overwhelming emotions, quickly ruled the cause of death as everlasting faint, later amending it to complications from childbirth. The case was closed. Zona's mom, Mary Jane Heister, never approved of her daughter's marriage to Trout. There was something about him that unsettled her, something dark lurking beneath his outward charm. When she heard of Zona's sudden death, an unshakable feeling took hold of her. Her daughter was murdered. For 4 nights in a row, Zona's ghost appeared to her mother, a pale, sorrowful specter bathed in an eerie glow. The spirit spoke of her tragic fate, detailing how her husband had been cruel and abusive, finally snapping in a fit of rage and breaking her neck. Mary Jane was now more convinced than ever. She took her story to the local prosecutor, John Preston, who, though skeptical, found her persistence compelling. He began asking questions, discovering that Dr. Knapp had never actually performed a proper autopsy. With enough doubt cast upon the initial ruling, Preston ordered Zona's body to be exhumed for a full examination. On February 22, 1897, an autopsy was performed in the presence of law enforcement and a jury of witnesses. What they found was exactly what Zona's ghost had described. Her neck had been violently broken. The autopsy report revealed that the first and second vertebrae were fractured. Her windpipe was crushed, and there were signs of finger marks on her throat, indicating strangulation. With this undeniable evidence, Erasmus Trout Shue was arrested and charged with murder. During his trial, the prosecution presented a strong case, relying on the medical evidence, rather than Mary Jane's supernatural account. However, the story of the ghost's visitation had already spread through the town, and many jurors were aware of it. Some believed that Zona had truly returned from beyond the grave to ensure justice was served. Trout Shue was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. He died a few years later in the West Virginia State Penitentiary, his legacy forever tied to one of the most eerie cases in legal history. To this day, the story of the Greenbrier Ghost continues to be told, not only as a chilling ghost story, but as a legal anomaly. It remains the only known case in the United States where the testimony of a ghost allegedly played a role in convicting a murderer. Some dismiss Mary Jane's account as the hallucinations of a grieving mother. Others are convinced that Zona truly reached out from beyond, determined to see her killer brought to justice.